Good morning, all, and thank you so much for coming to this early first panel in this beautiful space. We're so happy to be here with you today. I'm Marie Doezema, the Special Projects Lead at Columbia University's Global Center in Paris, and I am so happy to be joined today by this panel on transnational collaborations, a model evolving and ready to be invented. We have with us today Marina Walker, the executive editor at the Pulitzer Center, Laurent Richard, the founder and executive director of Forbidden Stories, and Hoda Osman, an executive editor at Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism. Over the past decade, transnational collaborations have reshaped investigative journalism. Reporters working across borders have exposed corruption, human rights violations, war crimes, illicit flows of money, and protected colleagues working in difficult environments. But as the model matures, it's also facing new and increasing pressure. Unequal resources between partners, increasing complexity in coordinating partners, pressure to prioritize national and regional audiences, and of course, last but not least, questions about sustainable funding. So we're here today to talk about the next phase of collaborative journalism, how the model should evolve to remain ambitious, become more equitable, and we hope prove sustainable. To begin today, I've asked each of our speakers to bring one image that represents the biggest challenge they see in collaborative journalism today. Cross-border investigations are powerful, but also often involve real friction between newsrooms, resources, expectations, and audiences. So we're going to start, quite literally, by looking at those. Marina, could you start?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay.
Could we get the first image on the screen, please?
Can you hear me now? No? Still no? Okay, I just use yours. Hello. Okay, now you can hear me. Good morning, everyone. So raise your hand if you are jet lagged. Yay, okay, good. Raise your hand if you have worked on a journalistic collaboration before. Whoa, all pros. Raise your hand, this is the last one, if you would do it again. Okay, yay, good, okay. So I started by breaking the rules, not good in a collaboration. They asked me one image and I gave two, but I promise they are connected. The trapeze image, I've done trapeze once successfully, but I've done collaborations many times where I have felt like I was in a trapeze dance. Collaborating is inherently taking some control risks. We are doing complicated stuff. Some people are taking bigger risks than others, and we are all supposed to be keeping each other's back. The topic that this screams at me is trust, and trust is the foundation of all collaboration. And if it's not there, then everything else is just not going to work, right? I like the definition of trust that I read recently that says that trust is the confidence that in the face of risk, the other person will do the right thing. Confidence that in the face of risk, the other person will do the right thing. And this is what keeps us wanting to do collaborations that we have experienced, that people did have our backs in those moments of great risk. There is no amount of rules and guidelines that we can come up with to govern a collaboration that can make up for a lack of trust. Usually when I see that people have lots of rules and big memos and big MOUs, I say, where's the trust? Do you really want to work with this person? Do you really trust them? And often the answer is no. Then great, then don't. Then don't, let's start from the basics. Okay, the second one is very connected, right? we take these risks together for the common good, for the common story, for the shared story. And we are going to have to make compromises, and we are going to have to cede things. We're going to cede our time. We're going to cede the perfect publication date. We are going to have to find what works for everyone. And so the ego, the unhealthy part of our ego is going to have to be outside of the door for everything else to work well.
Thank you, Marina, and I'm so glad you used two instead of one. Laurent, what did you choose?
Yeah, I chose a picture, and before just showing the picture, I wanted to thank the three of you and Emma who did prepare the panel. And I'm very, very glad to be alongside you. I remember when I was a Knight Wallace Fellow, I turned to Marina in the very first months of my fellowship to ask advice about how to set up a collaborative group. And Marina, you were so generous in giving of your time, and so I was really inspired by others as well. And with Oda, we were running the Gaza project together on a very complex investigation. So here is really the right place to talk about the challenges, how easy, how difficult it is, how impactful. And yeah, my picture is that one. I don't know if you're familiar with that game, what we call, I think in English, whack-a-mole. I don't know if you can show the picture. It's a game where you are hitting on the head of a mole, and other heads will surface, will popping up. I think you're gonna see the picture. This game, it's a very old one. So you hit hardly on one mole, and others will rise, will pop up. I believe that it's very aligned with the DNA of Forbidden Stories. You try to stop one journalist, you will face 50 others. And that is why collaborative journalism is, for me, really the future of journalism, in that period of time when we are more and more under threat, where the threat model is a very globalized as well. And I believe that kind of picture is really, looks like our investigation at Forbidden Stories. Let's try to stop Daphne Caruana Galizia in Malta, for instance. That was our first investigation. We pursue the work of Daphne all together to show them that even if they try to kill a journalist, they will never kill the story. So this is, the picture I chose.
Thank you, Laurent. Over to you, Oda.
Okay, so if you could please put up the next picture. Thank you. So the picture that I chose is a bit different. It's to tell you a story, and it's more personal. So just to give you some context, it was March 2025, and we were working on the second round of the Gaza project. The Gaza project was investigating the targeting of Palestinian journalists in Gaza by Israel. We had already published a series of investigations the year before, and we're almost 2 weeks from publication, or maybe even just a few days. And part of these investigations, there was a number of investigations, including one into the killing and targeting of drone journalists. Drones have been used in Gaza for over a decade by journalists, because often they are the only way or the most effective way to show the scale and extent of destruction, even before the genocide. So we decided to work on a story about the targeting of drone journalists, and it was during, maybe some of you would remember, that in March of 2025, there was supposed to be a ceasefire. So Forbidden Stories was leading this project. This was a Forbidden Stories collaboration, and they hired and contracted a young drone journalist to film in Gaza for us, in order for us to use these images to create the first photogrammetry model of Gaza. And photogrammetry is basically this technique where you use images to create sort of a 3D model, where you can really feel the destruction in a way, or whatever it is that you're filming, it doesn't have to be destruction, in a way that is much more than just satellite imagery or even just pure drone filming. So Forbidden Stories hired this young man. His name is Mahmoud, and he's the young man smiling in the back in the picture here. And he had finished working for our project, and we were working on our drafts. I think my draft was even in fact-checking already. And then I remember the day. It was a Saturday, and it was March 15th, and it was Ramadan. And then we have a group chat, and we got the message that Mahmoud had been killed. And he was filming that day for an organization that was opening a displacement camp, and he was filming with his drone. So, of course, we were all shaken by this. We were shocked. There's supposed to be a ceasefire, but as we see now, too, Israel continues to, the killing of journalists, of civilians, even during ceasefires. The man in the front of the picture, his name is Shadi, and he is a well-known drone journalist in Gaza, and he was kind of a mentor and a friend to Mahmoud. So after the initial shock of, what had just happened, I think everyone was shaken by it, and I especially felt, I was thinking of the Forbidden Stories colleagues, because I had not spoken to Mahmoud personally, but they were in touch with him, so it must have been even harder for them. And I want to be conscious here in that while I'm going to speak about how we handled this, I don't want this to be purely technical or a case study out of respect for Mahmoud and his work, so I want to pay him respects, and as well as also acknowledge his contribution, because we have these photogrammetry models, which you can all see thanks to him filming for us. So then we had to think, okay, what are we going to do? A journalist who was part of a project became the story, because how do we include him? And also Israel admitted to killing him, and issued a statement that was very confusing to all of us, because it named someone that has similar name to Mahmoud, but wasn't really him. It was somebody else. So we suddenly, after the initial shock and emotions, were all thinking, okay, what are we going to do? So we quickly thought about who can do what. I started making calls to Gaza. I reached the director of the organization and some eyewitnesses. Others were contacting the Israeli military, asking questions about what had happened. Others were researching into that name that was published to see who is this person. And then I think we only pushed our deadline by just a few days, but I think almost all the partners. So when we're working on this collaboration, one of the things really that maybe I'll speak about later is that we were interdependent, but also there was a level of independence because we all wrote our own drafts. So I think almost everyone rewrote the drafts. I decided to interview Shadi again, re-interview him, with a focus on Mahmoud and his relationship with him. So my draft included a lot of that into it. And that's my story.
Thank you for sharing that story. And I think this illustrates very powerfully how collaborative journalism affects the journalists working on a piece so differently depending where they are located. And this, I think, brings us back to the question of building relationships and building trust, especially when risk is involved, when tragedy is involved. Each one of you has talked about different challenges that are present in collaborative journalism, but I'm wondering if you could talk about what makes it work. What are some key ingredients that make it work? And be as concrete as you possibly can. And one element that I would love to ask all of you to focus on, because I think this is very, very interesting and perhaps one of the most difficult, is how do you build and maintain that trust?
Okay. I think the first thing I would say to start building the trust is how we pick our partners. And I would say that picking our partners correctly is probably more than 50% of the success of the investigation and the collaboration. For too long, we were guided, and sometimes we still fall through that trap of being guided purely by resumes and awards. It's easy, when you are doing something of very high stakes, to be flattered by somebody's, accomplishments and intellect and reputation. And even those of us who have been doing this work for a long time have made those mistakes. And we have that little voice in the back that says, that person is not a good collaborator, that person is for themselves, yes, he won all those awards, or she, but she's, and we still have done it, because who knows? So I would say picking your partners is like when you organize a dinner at home, right? And as the host, you want to bring diverse friends to meet one another, to have a good time, and you are thinking very carefully about who you're going to put around that table. I know that there's a particular friend of mine, I love her, she's from Egypt, and she just talks so much. She's really entertaining, but she's not going to sit well with other of my friends who are more introverts and who value being given a space for everyone. They don't want entertainment, they just want everybody to have a conversation. So as much as I love that friend, I don't invite her to dinner with those other friends. I carefully curate who is around my table. And that is like the first call of duty when we're putting together a collaboration. And truly think, if the people really want to be there for the right reasons and have the, what are the personality traits that we want to have? People who communicate well, people who are generous, have that generosity of spirit, right? That will do work where they will probably will not inform their own story, but it's going to be helping people in other jurisdictions. Those are the kind of personalities that we want to have. I can say one more thing is over-communicating. Do not underestimate how much we all need to not make assumptions. We always need to reinforce what has been said a million times, especially in the larger collaborations. I remember making a very big mistake, not making a big mistake, but a partner behaving in a really bad way. And several of us said, like, oh my God, how can they do that? But if we started reflecting about our own coordination, we realized that that partner had been given a lot of grace. That partner, again, we had made a lot of assumptions, and the bottom line was that that partner was very powerful and very prestigious. And so we did not ask all the right questions, we did not over-communicate the guidelines and the expectations, and then things happen. So just going back to those basics, 20 years after we started to collaborate in earnest, 10 years after Panama Papers, there's so much that we should not take for granted and always revisit before we put together these powerful teams to do really important work.
Yeah, I fully agree. Is it working? Yeah. I just fully agree, so I just want to add some additional points. I think, yes, for sure, the most important thing is the why. Why am I joining that group of journalists? For what kind of reasons? Am I joining that because I'm fear of missing out, the FOMO thing, or I'm joining that group because I really want to contribute and to give my best for that story? And I agree that the very first crucial step is the way you are building the group. At Forbidden Stories, what is, I think, very specific, that all of our investigations are very dangerous. One person has been killed, the killer is still free, might be ready to kill a second time, and a group of women and men will be teaming up to pursue this work. So the very first thing that we do is the risk assessment with a local partner. So we don't build a consortium out of nowhere based on the theory of a story, but we will first spend maybe weeks and months with only one person or one nonprofit, one newsroom locally who maybe was the one who was calling us because one of them was killed. And then we're going to spend some weeks together to evaluate the risk assessment. They are the ones who know the field better than us. They are the ones who will be there after the publication. They are the ones who know the perpetrators and all the companies and corruption and all the ecosystem. And most of the time, they are surrounded by a very violent ecosystem. So the first step for us is discussing with that local partner, and then evaluating even with the local partner the workflow, the time frame. And usually by experience, we learn as well at Forbidden Stories that projects that will last more than 6 or 7 months, it's going to be very difficult because of human resources, availability of people, and you need a kind of momentum and dynamism. So first step is building a relationship with the local partner. The second one is enlarging the consortium, looking not for all the big names in journalism, but the names you really want to see on board because of their skills, talents, and based on the story. And I think you don't want to be okay, we're going to be the biggest collaboration, or you don't want to think only about the numbers of your partners, but more about the need of the story. Because if you have, and we have done this before, where we were having many, many partners, and it's very time-consuming to coordinate that. But you want maybe a core team that all of them will work a lot on the story. You will be able to divide the work. And sometimes there are some stories where you will only need maybe 4 or 5 people. That's the perfect size. And for others, maybe that's going to be 50, and that's going to be the perfect size. But the first thing that will command, that's the story, the need. And then on the communication, I agree with Marina, is key. Over-communicating. I think when we speak about communication in collaborative journalism, we all have in mind those big GTC screen when we have 25 or 100 people jumping on the call. I've seen many projects just failing because it was so difficult to set up a time to invite the people to be on the call. And then you spend weeks and sometimes months to make sure that 85 people will agree to be there on Wednesday, 15th of March, 2037. And so that is very tricky. So I think what is very important for us is to do a lot of bilateral communication exactly at the same time of group call, to make sure that the people who will be a little bit introverts, will be a bit shy, because it requires a lot to go in front of 40 other partners and to share your views. And what we learn as well, that the people who are usually very shy are the ones working the better, the best. And so you want, as Marina said, you want to give the space for them. And so a call of that size needs to be very prepared. So there is some romanticism in collaborative journalism, but it's maybe 10% of that. The rest is structure, the rest is methodology, the rest is the way you are anticipating the things, the challenge, the problems, and the way you think you might be able to solve them before they happen.
Thank you, Laurent. Hoda?
So I think Laurent and Marina covered a lot, so I'm going to try to mention the things that might be a little different. One, I want to mention that for collaborations to work, you need a good project manager. And sometimes the project manager is not the organization or the person who initiated the investigation. Sometimes along the way, you discover that another organization is better fit to become project manager. And I've worked with Forbidden Stories on the 2 projects. We were between 40 and 50 journalists. It was 10 to 12 outlets, and they are amazing project managers. I say this a lot because it's truly difficult to manage a group that size. The meetings, how do you... so a good project manager is important. A good project manager that can gain the trust of all the partners, the ones with a lot of resources, that are experienced in doing collaborations because they've done several before, and the ones who don't have the resources, don't maybe have the language skills, and maybe I want to speak a little bit about language, and are, as Laurent said, maybe shy or don't feel confident enough to... successful collaboration is an equitable collaboration. It's not just about the output, it's not just about like showing off the investigation, but it's also about the process itself being effective and being equitable. And it largely often falls on the project manager to ensure that the collaboration is equitable. I want to say something about language. Language is important because it prevents a lot of journalists from being part of these collaborations because they're largely in English, unless you're doing collaboration within like one country that speaks the... I want to mention an example. I'm working on a collaboration right now. It's about 15 journalists, and everyone speaks English except for one person who speaks Arabic. And then half of the group speaks both English and Arabic. And I really appreciated that when we first started setting up the meetings, that the project managers for this investigation, they proposed that we would alternate. So one meeting would be run in English and one meeting would be run in Arabic. And the way we were doing it is that when the Arabic speaker was speaking, I would be translating in the chat. And then when the English speakers, the same thing like in the chat. And then the Arabic speaker, the only person who doesn't speak English, he figured out a way that in Google Meet, you could actually do in simultaneous translation. So suddenly he is able to understand the English because the translation from English to Arabic is actually pretty good. So we only needed to translate when he was speaking. Initially, he wasn't really speaking a lot when we were like still struggling with how are we gonna do this. And then he started like speaking a lot more and like expressing his opinions about how we should do this or how we should do that. And I just want to encourage everyone who's working on collaborations to take their time to figure out when there is these language challenges, to figure out what works. So now we've been doing this for like 8 months, and it's really worked out perfectly. Like he's comfortable, everybody else feels that like, you know, they're fair towards the one person who doesn't speak English.
I'm very glad that you brought up the question of language. And you know, in thinking about how to make these collaborations more fair and more equitable, that seems like an ongoing challenge, especially when you're working with different partners who have different levels of funding, different levels of human power. Do you, Marina or Laurent, have anything to add on that front? How to navigate those challenges?
Well, financial resources is obviously has always been a problem and an issue, and is now deeper than ever. So in any collaboration, thinking about not just who I want to invite, who I want to work with, but do they have the resources to be part of this? Can they travel to the meeting that everybody's going to go to? Can they even afford to do their own reporting? So again, not making those assumptions, especially if I'm in the global north and I am inviting outlets that are smaller in the global south. What gives me hope is that I've seen time and again in recent years really good examples of how we are starting to change this and to really think more equitably. At the Pulitzer Center, we have had the opportunity to support collaborations where a journalist has come, an organizer of a collaboration, and said, and I'm going to give names because I'm really proud of them, Stéphane Jorel from Le Monde. She has a job at Le Monde. She's a staffer. She doesn't have to worry maybe about resources. But she worries about the resources that her collaborators who are freelancers don't have. And she wanted to work because those people had the right expertise and the right personality for that big forever chemicals investigations that they did and won awards and so on. And so she came and said, could you help us? Could you give us some financial resources to pay for the data person who is a freelancer and is going to benefit everyone, and also for a couple of these other freelancers who, you know, carry important stories. We were absolutely thrilled to be able to support that. Another example of that, CLIP, the Latin American Center for Investigative Journalism, when they get grants, and I am in their board, so I disclose my bias and conflict of interest, but when they look for grants, they always include a category which is dinero para los aliados, like money for the allies. And when they invite, they ask, like, do you need the financial support to help you, you know, a little bit during these months of collaboration? So just it's a different kind of mentality from what we had before, where it was like, just join because you must, because, you know, how are you not going to be part of this? I want to say hello to my colleague, Emily Fishman. She's sitting there. Can you say hi, Emily? Emily is a journalist who has fully and completely understood what it means to be an equitable collaborator. Emily has been reporting in collaboration with her Myanmar colleagues, doing some of the most courageous and important stories on everything from crime and environment and more in a very restrictive environment. And Emily is always putting the safety, the financial well-being, and also the credit that those journalists deserve. And so has also been really inspiring. So if you want to do a collaboration where your partners are in an autocratic state where they don't have resources to do the work, ask her how she did it, because she can show us that it's possible.
Thank you, Marina. I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions at the end. So I know we all wanted to talk about the future of collaboration. Where is it headed? Where should it be headed? In terms of story development, in terms of funding. And Laurent, I know that you had some slides related to this question. Please.
Yeah, I wanted to show, because I believe really that, as I said before, that this model of collaborative journalism is really one of the biggest avenues for us, not only in terms of impact, but in terms of surviving. And what we did recently, and that's a survey that we will be releasing a few days before the World Press Freedom Day, that we were asking to more than 200 journalists worldwide, based in 53 countries, how to fight back after some threats, how to fight back in these environmental threats. They are the ones who are living in 53 countries. Many of those countries are countries where you could be jailed, you could be killed, and 37% of them, of the respondents, have been already physically attacked, abducted, or arrested. So that we talk here about really highly threatened journalists. And we were willing to understand exactly much more about the threat model, about what kind of threats they were receiving, in which way they were receiving those threats. And I will go fast on those first slide. The second slide, that is very interesting is that who is beyond the threats? And if you look at the first line, in red here, that means that 77% of respondents have been threatened by people coming from the public authorities, representative of the public authorities, even before criminal groups. So that is telling us about the world, about where the threat model is coming from in a period of time where we are designed as the enemies of the people, from the east to the west, right? This was not really surprising, to be honest. Of course, corruption is the very first kind of story they want to suppress. The second one is the human rights violation. Then you can see the environmental issues as well are the kind of story. Something that is really interesting for all of us, for the future, that 68% of them thinks that when you are under threat, the best or the most efficient reaction is to react with a global journalistic investigation. 17% for the judicial investigation, and 15% with a statement from NGO press release. So that is telling us about the importance. Of course, the work of advocacy group of an NGO is crucial, and of lawyers is crucial, is essential. But I think we, all the time, underestimate how journalism is powerful in its way to defend journalism. And a last slide that is very interesting, that 83% of them who are under threat think that the people who are targeting them are scary about one thing. It's about having us investigating their interest and their assets abroad. So this is really a case for collaborative journalism, cross-border journalism. And I believe that we are, of course, all here in that place, and all the ecosystem, or most of the ecosystem of the press industry, on the World Press Freedom Day, will be in favor of the press freedom, of course. But if we don't address that as a global issue, we're going to lose the fight for press freedom. So yeah, I wanted to share some slide, and just a last one. This is a quote from a journalist from Ecuador who is using the Safe Box network, who is protecting his ongoing investigation with the Safe Box, with forbidden stories. But not only that, he's explaining to the public opinion that he's not anymore alone, and that if anything is happening to them, the story will be pursued. And he explained to us that several politicians in Ecuador told him that they are not thinking twice before trying to silence its newsroom. So this is, I think, this is about the powerful of collaboration.
Thank you, Laurent. If we could go back to the very beginning of this conversation, Marina, you started by asking people in the audience to raise their hands who have been part of a collaborative journalism experience. And I would say about half of the hands went up. So for people here in this room who have not been part of a big collaborative project or a smaller collaborative project, what are the 5 golden rules you would leave them with as they might embark on this kind of project? If you were to write a collaborative journalism manifesto, what would be at the top of that list?
Okay, some of them we have said, and I'm going to say a few that we can all build together, but I would say of things that we haven't already mentioned, use as few rules as possible when organizing the collaboration. Drop the legalistic, fat MOU drafted by your lawyer. Your lawyer has no place in dictating how a collaboration should work. These are guidelines of engagement among colleagues who trust one another and are working in solidarity. So pick 3 things that are really important that might be related to credit, might be related to the confidentiality of the investigation, and that's another thing. I am supposed to not learn about what collaborations you are working on, right? And I know about what everybody's working on because people are going around telling everybody what they are working on. When we did Panama Papers, nobody knew what we were doing, right? Except the people who were working there. And now it's kind of like, well, yes, it makes us happy to collaborate, but no, you can be putting people at risk. You can be putting sources at risk. So I don't know how I ended up talking about that, but yes, maybe that's one of those guidelines, few guidelines, but really effective ones, and enforce them. To me, the golden rule is paraphrasing or quoting one of my mentors, Don Garcia, is no brilliant jerks, right? We learned that some years ago, and we've been discussing it today. You can work with people who are brilliant and are also kind and thoughtful and generous. So yes, you can say no to the brilliant jerks, and you're going to have really enjoyable and not nightmare-like collaborations. And if I ask people to raise their hands, I won't, whether you have had a nightmare-like collaboration. I think we all will raise our hands. A lot of us, well, we can do it if you want. We can do it differently, and I think that that's a lesson that we need to really imprint in our hearts. So.
Yeah, to add on that, I would say that if I have to convince someone in less than 1 minute or 2 minutes to be on board, thinking that that's the best person or the best team to be on that story, I used to hear some kind of arguments where people might be reluctant to that kind of collaborative journalism. Oh, it's going to be chaotic, it's going to be a big mess. If one of them is doing a mistake, that will contaminate the entire of the group. So I would say the first kind of things we can hear is that there is a national story or national connection with my own audience. How can I jump into that global thing without a national connection? And our answer is say, well, first, that's the starting point of the investigation. That's just the starting point. We don't know where we will be landing, but an investigation is something that you don't know at the end what you will find. So maybe if you start working, you will find the national connection. The second thing that people must say, I don't have enough resources. And I will say, you will have more resources than ever because you will have 50 journalists around you And you will use the reporting of others, going to Guatemala, going to Mexico. Even if you can't do that, you would. People might say, yes, but okay, I understand that, but we don't have the same standards. I hear that so many times. You will hear, on one hand, you will hear, oh, we don't have the same standards. On the other hand, you say, we don't have the finance for that. And so for the people saying that we don't have the same standards, we will say, okay, we will providing a MOU basically about the standards. How do we verify information? What about the sourcing? What about the credits? What about the way of reporting? And we will divide the work. So we will do our work on that. And on the question of the quality of the journalism, I would say if you have 50 journalists around you, you will have 50 fact-checkers behind every sentences. And at the end of that, if the people is still skeptical, I would say, please don't join. Because if you are not 100%, please don't join, because we only need people who are really fully committed, very well organized, very talented on the specific story, and that's going to be very impactful. And at the end of the day, that's the best way to restore the trust with the reader, with the public opinion, because you are delivering something that will be so rich, so fact-checked, so useful for the public interest. And this is where we are all. We have to convince the people of journalism and how democracy without journalism is not a democracy.
And Hoda, for you and your experience, what's the most important?
I think that they've said it all. I'm going to speak about something very specific, which is digital security, because I've worked in collaborations where it wasn't paid attention to. The digital security of any member of any collaboration is as good as the weakest link. So if I'm working with other journalists who are not, I have all my settings and I'm like paying attention to this, but the other partners are not, then my messages are going to their devices and we have access to the same shared drives, etc. So I encourage anyone working on getting into collaborations at the very beginning to have like a clear, maybe sometimes actually I've been in I think 1 or 2 collaborations where everyone's phones were checked. I think you, maybe in the Gaza project, I can't remember, but we had our phones all checked before we started working, and everyone had to be on certain settings, and I encourage everyone to pay very close attention to this, because often the investigations are extremely sensitive, and nowadays, you know, things are becoming very tricky with that.
I just want to add something very quickly. A lot of you and other collaborators sometimes tell us, like, there's too much collaboration going on, like everybody's offering us to join their collaboration. And there's a little bit of like that FOMO that we call it, that is the fear of missing out. I am going to say no to the one that is going to be amazing, or they're not going to call me again because I declined. I would invite you to turn the FOMO for what my friends in California call JOMO, which is joy of missing out. And just have the joy of saying no to things that might not be totally aligned with your resources, totally aligned with the spirit of your outlet or your audience. And then you can save yourself, you can save time, and you can save resources to say a very robust yes to the collaboration that best fit what you are meant to do, you know, the mission of your outlet or your personal mission as a freelancer. So let's not be pulled in a million directions, because collaborating with everyone in the end doesn't serve you well, and doesn't serve those collaborations well either. So joy of missing out. We can apply it also to Perugia, because we all get FOMO here and we want to be everywhere. Joy of missing out. Just go have an aperitivo somewhere.
Thank you, Marina. We do have a few minutes for questions. Maybe we could take 2 questions from the audience and then the panel can respond.
Hi, I'm Ivan of AFP. I have a question for the 3 of you. Do you have any experience to share about collaborating with non-journalists, researchers, scientists, that kind of stuff?
And maybe we can take one other question. I see one here in the front. Right, 3rd row, right here.
Hi, I was curious to hear your insights and experiences regarding collaborative distribution of collaborative projects in terms of repackaging, promotion, and also picking up certain risks when one of the partners potentially have safety concerns or being shut down, you know.
I can answer on the first. Maybe the question was about, did you have some experience with a non-journalistic organization? Yes, we did. We did the Pegasus project. That was a collaborative project investigating the misuse of the spyware called Pegasus. And we were having access to a list of phone numbers who were potentially infected, potentially surveilled. And so we reached out to people, and we team up with Amnesty Security Lab, which is a branch of Amnesty International. And the two organizations, Amnesty and Forbidden Stories, were granted access to that data set. And Amnesty was providing an amazing, brilliant team who were able to find the traces of infection into the device, into the phones of the victims. And so that was a key thing for a journalistic investigation. To be able to set up that collaboration between one journalistic organization and a non-journalistic organization that is doing advocacy work, that is suing governments, we had to set up a strong MOU to make sure that there was a very clear line, red line between our two walls. Forbidden Stories will be leading the editorial investigation, and the partner will remain, of course, independent, but all editorial will go to Forbidden Stories and partners, and the tech, the forensic investigation and all the tech background will be provided by Amnesty. But I think it's crucial. I really believe in some MOU written form. I know it sounds like a lawyer's language, but that's sometimes the best way to avoid the problems and to have clear communication channels and definition and division of the work as well. So, and it worked very well, and we work together since this one as well.
Thank you, Laurent. Do any of you have a quick response to the second question? Do you want to? It was about how the stories are packaged and diffused collaboratively.
Yeah, okay, so if the question is about how the distribution, the dissemination of the stories, right? So one of the principles, it's most of the time like that, it's that at the very same second, same day, same time, we will be publishing at once all the stories. Not all the same stories. People, newsroom remain independent. Some stories, some newspapers will provide like 5 stories with 2,000 words. Other will be providing a long form. Other will do a documentary. And if there is a coordination forces, a coordinator, the coordinator will be in charge of providing the communication package around that to make sure that we have the same languages, which is very key. Sometimes when we are very exhausted, we think only at that time about the communication of the project. But for me, it's as important as the project itself, but because most of the time, that's exactly the time where you are not sleeping for the past 10 days, and you are going into a radio interview, and then you are making a big mistake into the language of some corrupted people. And then you can get some lawyers after you because of that interview, but not because of the story itself. So communication is key, and so you have to make sure that to involve all the people in the communication role in your partner organization as well, to make sure that we are on the same page when it's very sensitive. We know that lawyers on the other side might attack exactly on this.
I just want to add very quickly on the first question. I think the future, the next chapter of collaborative transnational journalism is going to be is already a lot more transdisciplinary than what we've been doing the past 20 years. And I think that we need to be courageous and excited about that. I think it's important, like Laurent said, that we stay in our lanes, but we share a lot, but then we know what our role is, where the journalism stops, and then somebody else's role starts, whether it's an advocate, whether it's a lawyer, whether it's an architect. Speaking of an architect, one of the best collaborations I supported, it was just between two journalists, and it was an investigative journalist and an architect, and they did a definitive story on the expansion of the Uyghur camps in Xinjiang. They won a Pulitzer Prize. And one of the best things out of that collaboration was that the architect became an investigative journalist. Her name is Alison Keeling, and she works at the Financial Times right now. So let's go for that transdisciplinary collaboration, because it's bringing a lot to our profession. It's also making us a little bit more humble. Others know things that we don't, and we can benefit from that, and vice versa. But they also have audiences that we don't. And so it's on the distribution and on the engagement and impact side that working with other professions can really be game-changing.
I love that example. Thank you. That's a good note to end on. Thank you again, Marina, Laurent, and Hoda, for your work and for being on this panel, and thank you all for coming.